This presentation is for or related to assignment 5, Expressive and Conceptual Portraits. So I won't read everything word from word, but let's just kind of hit some key things here. So we're really talking again about expanding that idea of using a narrative to start your picture and kind of illustrating that picture with a person in it. So storylines. Another way to approach this is ideas or concepts. So in class, I assigned each of you 2 concepts. That might have been a word or a phrase. So you can ask yourself what pops in your head imagery wise with the word fear or love or any other kind of word or phrase, and that kind of gives you an idea how to work conceptually. To express the above, look at the following: symbolism, color, light tone contrast, body language and gaze, interaction, props, clothing or not. So let's start off with some work by Annie Leibovitz, and this is an image that you may recognize. You may know this person. His name is Iggy Pop. And the way that Annie Leibovitz works with a lot of her clients is there's kind of a collaboration effort. So she brings some ideas in, but she also works with what the person gives her or what the person might be known for, characteristics they may have, and kind of works together. So this is some early work of Annie Leibovitz before she had a lot of name recognition and a lot of like contracts with Disney and things like that. So it's real simple. But just if you know Iggy Pop, you would know that he's kind of a punk rock legend, and you would know that he's had a lot of personal problems and a hard life, especially with drug addiction. So with all those kind of things they're kind of filling in, look at the intensity of the body language and the gaze. Look at kind of the muscle tone that's being shown to us. Look at the eyes and the way they're looking directly in the frame. But then also look at the lighting choices here. So this is a Rembrandt style light coming from above and to what we see coming from the right, coming down at a 45-degree angle. You've got kind of that sort of dark eye on what we see as left. And you can see kind of that really harsh highlight shadow, especially on the muscles there. And so it's not something that's to flatter a person. It's something to kind of be intense, to be hard lighting on a hard surface and with a hard person's life. On the opposite, look at this picture that Annie Leibovitz did for John Lennon shortly before he was assassinated. And in this photo shoot, he's here with Yoko Ono, his partner. And you can ask yourself, not so much maybe on the technical side, but on the setup side here. So why is John nude? Why the kind of fetal position? Why is Yoko Ono kind of more stoic, and all these kind of questions like that, and this contrast between the two, and this sort of loving embrace. One interpretation for me is that it sort of kind of shows John being dependent on Yoko as kind of being the balance or the pillar of strength in the relationship. John being vulnerable in some ways by showing himself nude in front of the camera here. So expressing ideas. So here's actually some student work. So this was an example of the word stress from a previous semester. This was, I believe, the role or the phrase that was given to the student was role reversal. And so she came up with this idea of this kind of female being sort of waited upon and kind of being in charge of these male figures here. So it was kind of a fun photo shoot. So expressing emotion and feelings, a lot of that happens to do with the body language that you get from the person, but then you can enhance that with the lighting. So, there's with this child here that kind of soft feathered edge shadow lighting. It's very kind of soothing. There's kind of a flowiness, the way that looks like wind is taking the hair back. And there's that soft focus there that's being played with a little bit as well. Maybe a little bit of motion blur going on there as well. But everything together is kind of combining, and there's a very kind of subdued mood to this image. Whereas if I give you this as an opposite, this has an intenseness and a harshness. One, it's black and white, it's high contrast. there's kind of all this dirt and makeup kind of situation going on. The look from the eyes is much more aggressive. I feel like this person's ready to fight. So some former student work here, and I don't remember exactly what the concept was here, but it was something about being kind of basically having to listen to what others are expecting of you and what they're doing of you and how they're trying to modify you, or how they're trying to change you, and kind of just feeling like somebody's kind of poking at you, and kind of that sort of annoying and kind of anxiety kind of feel that all those internal feelings would create. So let's take this back down to lighting. So if we want something to seem sort of melancholy, doing something with a lot of mid-tones and darker tones might make sense, and not illuminating the face as much might make sense. So there's a little bit of concealment. And something like this, I'd actually criticize the photograph a tiny bit, because I wish the light was kind of more at the connection between the dad's face and the baby's face. But, there's some nice stuff about it too. But right now the light is on the kid's clothing more, and it's taking me away from that connection point. So this was kind of a fun one, and you could even pull things from the abstract assignment and kind of keep working with them into this assignment. So if lovely reminders popping up. So with this, you can kind of see that there's kind of one emotional state being shown to us, and then a second emotional state by the pictures on the side. So these are basically multiple flashes going off in the same exposure, giving you this different look here that we see. But everything's kind of dark and low key for the most part, and so there's kind of a sense of almost like panic or crisis in this kind of lighting. So things that come together. So this is kind of more of a boudoir kind of idea, more of a sultry or kind of a tease kind of situation here. So a lot of things hidden in the darkness with the partial silhouette, not revealing too much, but enough to kind of catch the eye. And then a lot of subtleties with going out of focus. Kind of points of view, light kind of showing you to this face and kind of getting you to kind of look at the makeup and the lashes. Playing around with color. So, you come from whatever background you come from, and you've got maybe some exposure to the color wheel at this point. But there's a color and psychology component that you can play with. So blues are typically kind of on the melancholy side in Western societies as far as psychology goes. So there's usually a lot of kind of loneliness or sadness or melancholy as things kind of go towards the blue spectrum. You can play around with kind of more sort of this, almost feels like nighttime, like street light kind of thing. And if we really break this down, we've got a magenta light coming from our right and kind of a cyan bluish light coming from our left. So you have this sort of hot cold thing happening. So it's like there's this atmosphere in the background of cool, and then kind of this warming up in the foreground of warm.
I lost my first tooth.
Okay. Hold on, let me pause. So here's that same photographer using kind of a similar, this is kind of more of a warm yellowish red light paired off with a blue. Symbolism and reference. So a lot of this is about, how you want to reference something that people have experienced outside the frame before. So in this work by Cindy Sherman, she's kind of making fun or satire of kind of a particular sort of LA stereotype, and kind of taking it to a level of grotesque in a way. So playing around with imagery that people would recognize, religious symbols, for example, social symbols, cultural symbols. All those things can be fun to work with. And also changing how we see those symbols. So in this work here is actually some student work. Here is taking this idea of the clothed face or the concealed face, but having a nude at the same time. So there's a dichotomy between a cultural expectation and going directly against that cultural expectation. And here there is this imagery of war that's been projected onto the person. And in here there's a direct reference to where the wild things come from the book, and at this point also the movie that was done as well. And you might think about what is in that book and the sort of the, I guess, conflict in the child in the book, and how that child is having a hard time dealing with situations from the book, and how maybe representing somebody as a young adult in that kind of same garb will kind of reference some of that struggle. So when you're creating characters, a lot of it's about props, clothing, makeup, and kind of making it all come together. I think this is fun because a lot of people know David Lynch as kind of an interesting director, but he also has done photography on the side for many years. So here's some work that was shot in our studio where transforming a student to look like a pilot based on this parachute and helmet. Here's some work where the person's been given these glasses, a certain hairstyle, this vest, and then kind of trying to have maybe sort of this biker look and having kind of this intensity with the sort of hitting of the fist. And they were shot in the studio, but they replaced the background with this brick wall to make it feel kind of more street or urban. I love this kind of situational idea of playing with narratives. So here you have this card table game. You seem to have this moment where one person thinks they're in control and the other person's stopping them. So all these things come together. And some people do a really interesting way of creating sort of things that feel like they're in a certain time or a certain state, or they fit in a certain depiction style by putting all of it together. So this has kind of that sort of Audrey Hepburn, golden Hollywood kind of feel to it, even though it's in color. Part of it's the clothing, part of it's the cigarette prop, part of it's the hairstyle, part of it's the pearl necklace, all these things coming together. This stuff kind of has more kind of like maybe sort of like grim fairy tales, so fantasy and nightmare sort of kind of combining together ideas. Same here. Fashion really likes to use a lot of these ideas in how they depict models. So you can kind of look at how color is being used. It's very subdued, very pastel, but you can also think about light. You can think about clothing and pose, this kind of stage performance idea. So in celebrity portraiture, a lot of times it's fun to take a person who everybody knows to some extent and play off of what people know of that person. So you could do that even without celebrities, but it's easy to kind of get y'all to reference people that we may know. So here a comedian and playing around with that. An actor who tends to be in various different sort of roles that we find absurd. And in editorial portraits, a lot of times we're taking reality instead of making stuff up, but then we're trying to capture that with the same sort of set of skills. So here we have a person who's probably a stage performer, a singer, works probably a lot with jazz and things like that, and trying to create an image that shows all those qualities of the person. Here we've got maybe the people who are kind of more behind the scenes in an environment who put together this business, showing their space. Here we've got this person, and we're probably doing product placement here and talking about what this person does and their role in the fishing industry, but it all sort of comes together. There's nothing like Keith Richards for selling high quality bags and suitcases in this Louis Vuitton ad here. David LaChapelle, who is kind of blurs lines between fine art and working commercially, tends to be just kind of one of the most on top of it, big bold sets, lots of things going on. So lots of performance going on, lots of ways of using all these skills together. So I thought I'd throw some more student work so you can kind of see. So here are some sort of Audrey Hepburn sort of style shots that were done at home. So a person did this at home with strobes and kind of set up a scene. Of course, they had access to the clothing, and that helped. But the rest of the stuff was stuff that they just put together from around their house. This was shot in the studio, and it has kind of this sort of like almost like action movie feel to it. And they played around with bringing in some various types of lights to put up in the background that you get the bokeh and the blur from, and it kind of feels like maybe something's happening more on the street or something like that. This was also shot in a studio setting, and they actually brought in a smoke machine to kind of create that atmosphere, all one shot. This was shot on location. There's been some digital manipulation after the shoot to kind of subdue the colors and lay over some texture. But this student, I remember the phrase that she had chosen was pushing daisies, and had come up with this based on her own concept. This was kind of thought to try to be shot in a fashion style and sort of have this kind of playfulness with the carousel, where it was thinking in terms of getting an interesting fashion look out in public. This was a student who chose romance or love and decided to put it together this way on location. This was another student doing stuff in a very fashion sort of oriented way out in public, using I think some stuff from Balboa Park as the backdrop. This was shot in our old studio and trying to capture this dancer. A lot of this kind of just being free and being kind of loud, and just using the person's face and head and playing around with that. More kind of work on multiple flash in the camera, kind of playing around with sort of like depicting different states of a person's mental changes going on between different levels of frustration and angst and calm all at the same time. This was the car from the car shoot that I talked about here, and this wanted to kind of capture sort of this relationship between this sort of obsession with this car culture. This was a person who was really connected to roller derby and wanted to have kind of this, I think in her words, she wanted to take the roller derby and sort of make it into sort of kind of like a nighttime superhero kind of like, and I think she was referencing the movie The Crow at the time when she came up with this look. And that's it.